darling.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Racing Starts Challenge. We are here and ready, waiting for you to get going with the critical middle part of your start. A little bit later on, we're going to be joined by expert guest Olympian Will Satch. But for now, it's me and Marlene. So let's kick off. In the comments, let us know how you did yesterday, practicing strokes 1 and 2. And there were a few comments that came through overnight. So we will endeavour to answer those questions as we go along. Right, today, Marlene, what are we talking about?
Well, we're going to dive into strokes 3 through 8. So they're pretty important for starting to get the boat moving, build up to full slide, but that's about as far as we're going to go.
Exactly. We're going to it's like tenterhooks, isn't it? You've got to leave a cliffhanger for tomorrow's episode.
Yeah, we can't tell you everything.
We want you to come back. And anyway, Emily Craig would be really disappointed if nobody showed up to see her speak. True. So we've started off with strokes 1 and 2, which are about getting the boat going from stationary, getting locked on, getting a really solid connection. If you've signed up, you should have got an email overnight from us with a summary of that, with a summary of all of the points that Henry made and some of the questions and answers that got covered off. So today we're on to our third stroke. Marlene, talk us through some common stroke sequences that people tend to use.
Okay, probably the most common one is 3/4, half, 3/4, full, full. Let's say looking at the first five strokes. So they'll go 3/4, half, 3/4, full, full, and they aim on getting to that full stroke like on stroke 4, which is a little bit, could be a little bit early, depending on the conditions and the rhythm of the crew. But that's a very, very common one. And if you don't feel like experimenting too much, that's your go-to first 5 stroke starts. Some go half, half, 3/4, full. So 2 shorter strokes, a little bit longer, a little bit more length, and build to full by, say, stroke 5. I think it's important that by stroke 6, you are at full slide. And how there are crews, for example, who are a little bit more freeform about it. For example, the Danish women's quad that raced in Atlanta back in '96, they were training at Craftsbury when I was there, and they approached their start in a very flexible style. Basically, they tuned into the stroke and they did what she did. And it sounds kind of simple, but she may have adjusted her start to be half, 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 3/4 full, full, half, 3/4 full, full, depending on what the conditions were. Was she in a tailwind? Was she in a headwind? They were in a quad, but they were very attuned to following the stroke and really keying off what she did. And so there's another bit. If you've got a crew that's really well trained together and spends a lot of time together, and your stern pair if you're in a bigger boat, or your stroke really well if you're in a small boat, you can also approach it that way, depending on the wind, the direction, the current, what you feel you need to do to just get to full slide by the 6th stroke, and focus on good length and breaking into a good rhythm.
So a recommendation from now until your regatta is every time you row off, do your start sequence, even if you're rowing off at light pressure. If your start sequence is 3/4, half, 3/4 full, do that and start to get super, super accurate at judging. Did our catches all go in together? Did I slide the same as the person in front of me? If you're in a headwind, what did it feel like? If you're in a tailwind, what did it feel like? Because you can get as refined as you like, and the only limits to the refinement are the skill of the athletes. So if you're working with a less experienced crew, my recommendation is you actually have them do half three-quarter full. Don't do that first stroke at three-quarter slide. Make it super short, super consistent. Teach them that from day one. That's how we row off. And then when it comes to doing a racing start, they're not phased because they've done it many, many, many times before.
I think it's important also to remember that you're trying to move the boat and get the boat going. So the emphasis isn't about the fast slide or the quickness of the slide. It's about, let's get the boat off the line. Let's try not to kick it to the stern. Let's get it moving forward, and let's build everyone up with the body swing and the rhythm. Let's build everybody up to full slide, and focusing on your breathing, so that you can start to lengthen and build that boat speed in those early strokes.
So the goal at the end of stroke 5 is to be at full slide. By this time, the boat should be beginning to move quite quickly. We're going to come on a little bit later to talk about body swing and when you introduce it, because we had a few questions about that. And if you've got questions, please type them in the chat below the live stream that you're watching, and we will answer them as we go along. But before we go on to that, I want to talk about the difference between small boats and big boats. By small boats, I mean single, double, pair. Big boats, any 4, quad, or 8. Marlene, what do you recommend people do differently when they're in the slightly slower small boats?
I think when you're in the slower small boats, you have to be more careful about getting the boat moving forward and not kicking the boat backwards. The boat's a little bit more sensitive, which is, in a bigger boat, you've got a lot more weight. So you have to treat that a bit differently. But, in the small boat, focus on good purchase in water, not tearing the water, getting some body weight behind the oar handle. And I think you need to be patient with those first couple of strokes.
I've always found that when you're in big boats, the ratings tend to go higher, and you tend to be able to, the boat actually starts moving a little more slowly than small boats. If you ever do a start side by side with a double and a quad, the double will often be quicker off the first few strokes, but then the quad cranks it up and goes past them quite quickly. So I expect to get to higher stroke rates when I'm in a bigger boat than a smaller boat. Equally, the smaller boats, I generally find that you can crank it up and you get to what I tend to call it a kind of terminal velocity. Like, you're high,
right?
You're working hard.
That's it.
You're not going any faster for additional rates. So you need to know where that point where you're not going to get additional boat speed for your extra effort in taking the rate up a point. So I find smaller boats get there quicker.
Yeah, a lot less weight. I mean, you've got, think about like the elephant in the room, moving an 8, it's a big operation, right? So moving a pair, moving a single, your rowers don't weigh as much, your boat doesn't weigh as much, but you have to be sensitive to not also blow that rating and just start, spinning your wheels too. We don't, smoke coming out of the smokestacks.
Right, let's talk about building the rate, because the idea about this part of the racing start is that you need to get above your race rate and you're already at full slide. So take us through how you're going to build the rate.
Well, once you get up to full slide, I think overall you need to think about in your strategy, and as you practice this on a daily basis as you're approaching the regatta, you also have to get a sense of the entire stroke and start sequence. Okay, we're not in the whole sequence right now, but you know, you want to have a sense of how long is this going to take, because you're pretty anaerobic when you're in this process, and you know, you can stay relatively anaerobic for about 30 or 35 seconds. So with, you know, within this period of time, when you get to full slide, you know, you, again, the momentum is building, and you know, the crew has to work together. They've got to focus on getting the hands out of bow together, and they have to make sure with a strong leg drive that they're moving the boat, and they're not trying to pull the oars through the water, but they're trying to push the boat past the oars. And you know, I would say just a little quickness, you know, emphasizing a little sharpness at the end of the leg drive and a little quickness of the handle away helps to build that rating in kind of a lively way, so that you're picking up. And I know Rebecca has a really cool story about how Harry Mann used to teach those starts.
Yeah, in fact, the detail of the Harry Mann start is in our VIP. If you choose to buy the upgrade, you've got the detail of exactly how to do this. But Harry was coaching Greg Searle, who was the British men's single sculler at the time. And he decided that it was very similar to your Danish women's quad description, that you took the first big long stroke from about 3/4 slide, and then each subsequent stroke, you put the oars in the water when the bows are high. So you need to be able to feel the bow lift. And when that bow is high, your blade goes in. So it is as variable as Marlene described earlier. But you can then get out to full slide by, might be stroke 6, 7, might be 8, 9, depends on the conditions and how you're rowing. The key thing that I think in Marlene's description of taking the rate up that you mustn't forget is how hard you need to push your legs. You might feel that, you know, some people use the word spinning, and spinning along you can forget that you have to also be powerful at the same time. So building the rate for me is about moving slightly quicker each stroke than the one before. And some people like to not use body swing in order to get the rate up at this stage. I have a little drill that I'll tell you a little bit later about this, but there are options. Again, like many racing starts, you've got a choice here. You can get out to full slide on, say, stroke 5, and then perhaps have a call that says sit up, and then row 5 through to 8 or 9, sitting very, very upright, just doing legs and arms. And then use your body swing as a means of then beginning to transition the rate down when you step down onto your race rate. And it's quite a good way, because your body swing comes towards the second half of the power phase, so it's towards the finish. So you can use that to make a very strong rhythm, sit back, set your arms away, body over, and then you've dropped down maybe half a point or a point in rate. Increasingly, I don't choose to do that. I don't choose to have any restrictions in body swing, that we actually just move with the boat, keep moving, don't do anything that's exaggerated or different than you might normally. So if you want to do more body swing, go from your forward lean position to your back lean position, but just move through that angle faster. Don't lean forward and lean back further. Don't do that. Just go, be more dynamic through that range of movement. Starts are high pressure, high tension, and I believe in simplicity rather than complexity. And that's one of the reasons why I'm increasingly not coaching different body swing movements.
Yeah, and you have to practice this, and especially if you're in a pair or a double or a team boat, because you have to see what works best for the crew, you know. But I absolutely agree that, you know, it's got to be cemented in your brain, rock solid, because you don't want to have to think about what is, you know, you want to be able to focus on the important things, which is the pressure. and the blade work and getting the boat moving. And you don't want to be thinking like, oh, do I do this now? Or what do I do this now? Like it should be very simple, but highly, highly practiced. And I remember last year we were able to have a conversation with Adam Creek, and he was in the Canadian 8 that won in Beijing, and they had such an intense reason for why they did everything that they did on every single stroke. And in fact, for every stroke of the race. But, you know, their starts were very, very, very dialed in, and they really worked out for every single part of their stroke sequence, start sequence, what was the purpose and why were they doing it? Why was the blade depth where it was? Why was the swing the way it was? So it's, you know, you can get into it as much as you want, but I think it's a good lesson to understand why are we doing each stroke the way we're doing it. Doesn't mean that it needs to be complicated, but everybody has to buy into it, right? So
very true. That's a great lesson in general about having a common language and understanding in your crew. With regards to body swing, if you want to do it, the drill that I recommend you try is actually a no body swing drill. So you row off and do this just in normal paddling. You can do it at low rate, you can do it at high rate. Row off, good pressure, so at least 3/4 pressure, preferably firm pressure, low rate, and then call no body swing. And everybody sits up tall and tries to row just your legs and your arms. And if you can be observed, somebody outside the boat watching you, this particularly helps. And you want to do this for 10 strokes and then go back into your normal rowing and then do it again. And probably the person observing you will tell you something like this, that for about 3 strokes, you were really upright. And then the momentum of the boat moving under you introduced a very small body swing into your movement. And it's my belief that that's about how much you want to be doing when if you decide to do a sit upright for maybe 5 in order to shorten the stroke so that you can get the rate up. When you then want to introduce your body swing, it needs to be super gradual in so far as, say, you've done 5 really upright, but then the momentum of the boat will start to help you introduce the swing. You can do stroke 6 with pretty much no body swing at all, like a very, very little bit, and then just feel your way into moving just a little more gradually each stroke over the next 3. So over sort of another 4 or 5 strokes after you're upright, you have then got back to rowing with all of your body parts at full length and still at a high stroke rate. But as Marlene said earlier, definitely needs practice. So how high should your rate go?
it depends. I mean, it depends, like you said, it depends what boat class you're in, and it depends on the skill of your athletes. You know, some athletes, you know, hitting 42, 44 is not a problem. For some older athletes, 32 might be it. So again, I don't think, you know, I think you have to practice it and you have to figure out what's efficient, because again, if you're not moving the boat and you're risking catching a crab or washing out or missing water, that is not going to help you in the start. You know, just try to keep the start as sober as possible, as clean as possible, and, you know, get so that you can build that swing and get your boat moving in the race. So stroke rate is going to be, it's going to be relative. I mean, definitely do the best you can of what's efficient. But if the blade work gets sloppy and you're at a risk, if somebody catches a crab in the start, you know, that's a real big problem. So, you know, we want to avoid damage. So.
The key is the rate you wind to in your start must be above your mid-race pace. So if your mid-race pace is 28, if it's 32, if it's 36, You've got to wind to above that. So that's your metric. And if you want to find out how high you are capable of going, just do some half slide rate builds. Yes, it's just a practice, but at half slide, you can move very dynamically, and every 10 strokes, take the rate up to, and you'll probably take it up more than 2, but don't worry about it. Just go up until your technique starts to fall apart. And that just gives you a clue as to how, what's the skill set right now with this particular crew. And you're far better to be a tiny bit conservative in rate, maybe 1 or 2 points, and know that you can get a clean start, than to risk everything until you're skillful. Everyone can take risks, and I've got no problems with anyone taking risks. But what you have to understand is what's the possible downside. Actually, in our VIP, there is an amazing video of the speed orders for the US rowing selection of the lightweight women's doubles in, I think, 2019. You are not going to believe what happened. And
it's pretty wild.
It is good. Now we've got a question here. As Club Masters rowers, how are we going to understand the impact of small changes to our start? I'm going to give the first answer to this.
Okay.
As any rower, Club Masters, juniors, internationals, the impact is felt in 1, your boat speed, which you can measure; 2, how the boat feels as it is moving; and 3, how the athletes feel. Do they feel confident? Do they like the feel of a particular start? So it depends on what you're working on. But if you're working on good blade work, you can tell the impact of a small change to your blade work, just the same as Will Satch, who's going to be talking to us later, can tell the impact on his blade work to his crew.
Well, absolutely. And just, to build on that, you have to pay attention to what you're doing. And if you're practicing and you're deciding as a crew, let's put a little bit more emphasis on this in the stroke. Let's put a little bit more focus on this in the first 5. Then you need to pay attention to what happened and evaluate it and decide, is this something we want to incorporate into the philosophy of our start and how we're going to practice that start. So, Club Masters rowers are as capable to understand small differences in boat movement as anybody else. You simply have to pay attention to it, and it's there, and it's a skill, but be perceptive, listen to the sound. Like, do you hear all the, crashing of feathering and squaring and oarlocks and turbulence, or is it clean and crisp? What does the water sound like? In addition to feeling, listen to the sound, and listen and feel for the rhythm. But if you start tuning into these little things, and your coxswain can help you, can say, okay, on the next start, let's pay attention to what it sounds like. On the next start, let's pay attention to our releases. Are we throwing water, or are the puddles nice and tight? So your coxswain can help give you different focal points as you practice your starts.
Yeah, or someone on the bank with a video camera. You can give your child your phone and say, just film us. Make sure that you can see us in the middle of the picture.
Absolutely. Anything that gives you feedback to help you evaluate what you were focusing on is going to help you for sure.
Let's quickly run through some common mistakes. I'm going to do my first 3. The first common mistake is rushing the first stroke and rushing the end of the first stroke as you move on to the second stroke, or get onto the recovery between the first and the second power phase. The second most common mistake is rushing the second stroke, moving on to the third stroke. So genuinely, starts tend to be cleaner and stronger if you're just a bit more patient. And we did emphasize that yesterday. And then rushing into the third stroke, the same. And remember that if you're doing 3/4 half, 3/4 full, or some variant thereof, the chances of you rushing as you lengthen the slide is very high, because the power phase in a half side stroke is quite short, you're actually then going to have a recovery that's a little bit longer than you expect because you're rolling out to 3/4 slide. So patience is definitely needed in those first strokes. Marlene, any more common mistakes to add?
Too much tension in your hands and too much tension in your face. So, a lot is happening, but just try, think about 100-meter, the best 100-meter sprinters. If you see Usain Bolt sprinting, his face is really relaxed and you can actually see the muscles in his face moving. So relaxing your jaw, relaxing your teeth, just remembering to breathe. I mean, there's not a lot of time here in the start, but you still have to breathe, particularly breathe out, and tension in the hands. I think again, with these quick strokes, you don't want to overhandle your oars. And if you're really tense, you're not going to feel what's happening at the sleeve and the blade. So just 90%, not 110%, right? Put the 110% in the legs and keep the hands 90% in the sense of tension, so that you keep feeling what's going on. Even, these are very quick reactive strokes. And if you have too much tension, you're actually going to slow the handle down too much. So
I'm going to add to the lack of tension. If on the recovery, you can have loose legs. You've probably heard me talk about the jelly legs exercise before. If you don't know what it is, just message us. If you can have really loose legs every time you're on the recovery, A, it gives your muscles a tiny little rest before the next power phase. But B, it also helps contribute to what Marlene was describing. The last thing we're going to say before we bring Will Satch on is understand the quantity of repetition and practice you need is higher than you think. And I encourage everybody to start getting onto these practices, building them up just in the way that we're showing you in these webinars right away. Don't miss a single outing. You have bad weather, practice it on the erg.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't even have to hold the handle on the erg if you're practicing this either. If you're a sculler, just mentally go through the motion, go through the reactiveness.
It's a great suggestion. And of course, then you can have very relaxed legs. Now, I'm delighted to welcome to the first ever guest on our podcast and webinar, Will Satch. Ta-da! Will.
Hey guys. Am I a little bit zoomed in there, or is that all right? I think we're all good.
You're all good.
Right?
I can do this, you see, and I can make you see.
Yeah.
I know, right, that's all right.
Now, Will's a particular, I'm a fan of Will's for a couple of reasons. One, because when you hit the headlines, you were the young boy on the British rowing team. Do you want to give people just a quick summary of your career up to 2012 Olympics?
Well, it sort of started with rugby. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to a rowing school, learnt to row, lost for 4 years on the trot, got a lot of fire in my belly to achieve. There's a guy called Athol Hundermark who started me off there, who was passionate, South African guy, who went on to achieve a lot with Abingdon. He's now at Shrewsbury. And then went to Leander, Brian Armstrong, a few other names. And basically at 21, grew another inch, lucky with the lungs and the levers. But just lucky, I just think sport's an amazing thing, and having stepping stones along the way, like Leander being down the road, and the luck of being good at rugby to go to rowing school gave me an opportunity, and I made the most out of it. And I got good at sort of 22, really, but made the squad, in and out of the squad at about 20, and then the rest ends up sort of being history. But I think my favourite race ever is probably with my best mate at Home Olympics, which was our debut. And then following that, we had 4 years of great success. And again, owe it to all the boys I was with, the camaraderie, the discipline. It was only achievable when we came together. And that was what that's going to lead on to one of the races we're going to speak about a bit later, sort of leading into Rio.
Rightio. So everyone's waiting to hear your big race story. So kick us off, Will.
So we've got, obviously, off the back of London, 3 pretty quality consecutive years of achieving when it push came to shove on the night, but along the way, sort of peaks and troughs of performance. And I think it's very easy to get subsided by that mentally, especially when you're training full time in something. Obviously, we all take rowing very seriously. It's a sport that takes a lot of energy and a lot of time all the time, at whatever level. So, yeah, it was a bit of a frustrating situation when you've come off the back of being, the 8 we were triple world champions leading into Olympic year, and it's obviously an awesome place to be, but at the same time, you're up on a pedestal and you're there to be shot down. And all of a sudden you can feel the pressure there. I kind of revel in that. I kind of like being under quite a lot of pressure. I don't think I enjoy it at the time, but it definitely gets the best out of me, and that's personal. But leading up to that Olympic regatta, we had, obviously, you normally have 3 World Cups. We missed the first one, went to Europeans, underperformed. We're producing a lot of good time back home, our home water at Caversham Lake, and on various training camps, mainly out in Portugal. Some serious speed, obviously. For me, I was still the youngest in the boat, but to be with 2 of my sort of childhood heroes who I'd watched at Beijing with Pete and Andy, and the confidence and the discipline they installed into the crew as well, it was quite a frustrating period not to be right at the top, but then at the same time to be under the wings of Jürgen, and that whole training regime that he had obviously ended up getting the result that we wanted. But along the way, so we ended up the penultimate regatta before the Olympics out in Poland, and I remember we'd been back home and performing really, really well, and then sort of on prognostic right up there, top boat, and then all of a sudden we're there and we're underperforming again, and it was just this same nightmare that came round and round every time we went to a World Cup. And obviously, like I said, leading off the back of being world champions, everyone's sort of looking, going like, what the hell's going on here, especially when you're that close to the Olympics, the one we've all been training for. So yeah, frustrating time. And we'd underperformed in the heat, but it wasn't a real underperformance. It was just slightly under, and it meant that we went through the rep. And long story short, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. We went into back to the hotel that night extremely frustrated with not making it straight into the final. Obviously with the 8, so I think sometimes it can be a bit easier because you don't have other races along the way. Such as smaller boats, you might have only 8 in the competition at these World Cups. So if you do get a quick time, you can go straight through to the final, and that's quite a joy. And then you can rest up and really hit it hard on the day. But we didn't have that luxury this time, and we went through the rep, and we scraped through, and we got one of the worst lanes. And you're thinking, oh my God, like what's going to happen with the selection here? So went back to the hotel that night. I remember walking around with Tom Ramsey, a guy who's in the crew, both overthinking, sort of really upset and almost contemplating what's going to happen. Are we going to go home and have to go through reselection and see where we are? And a lot of emotion running through the veins. And we sat down that night, and the clarity that Jürgen always brought was brilliant. And I think that ultimately that the response that we gave him showed him that we were worthy of being the 8, and we showed him that we were capable of achieving. And we just sat around the table, and basically every time we went out, I think Langers and I maybe overcooking it, overbeating the eggs, and just sort of rushing out, being a little bit too high for the big horses in the middle of the boat. We need to obviously lay down the power, such as Paul Bennett. And we decided to drop the rate, which is quite a weird concept, and obviously an old school way of looking at things. The bigger the boat, higher the rate, and all that. I kind of disagree a little bit with that. But the biggest thing was loading up the spoon efficiently and effectively and basically trying to break the foot stretcher, which sounds very, very prehistoric. But we had to really scale it back to basics. And there's a lot of things. I've been coaching out in New Zealand for 2 years after all of this. And one thing I'll always try and discipline and get into the boys about is just take one stroke at a time. There's often this case of people talking about, oh, you're only as good as your last stroke. And I think a lot of that's complete rubbish. You're as good as the stroke you're in. So that night, sat down with Jürgen back in Poland, day before the race, last time to shine before maybe reselection or selection up to the Olympics. And we basically agreed that we were going to drop the rate, have the discipline to drop the rate, sit way lower than we were before. We're sort of trying to come down at 38, 39, take it right back. And if anything, I went too far with it. But there was a beautiful situation where all of a sudden we've got out the blocks. We're level pegging with the previous Olympic champions. We're side by side, and we start eating through the Germinate, and being about 4 or 5 pips below was just an epic feeling that I can't quite describe. But it's sort of hairs standing up on the back of your neck sort of stuff. And it just filled us with confidence going into our sort of last training camp, leading into Olympics. So we ended up finishing the race, and we got silver. We didn't win it, but I knew that all I had to do was systematically from then on leading into Rio was, up the rate every day at training by maybe it was 0.1 or whatever it is as an average. And then when we got to Rio, we just came down at 37 or 38 rather than 34 with the same power. And it sounds really basic and simple, but I think a lot of the times basic and simple is good. And I think especially within a lot of rowers, it's overthinking. And with adolescent boys that I've coached, it's a lot of overthinking. Adolescent girls, same thing. And I'm sure that runs all the way through at any level. So, those strokes, for me, it was always, this might be a bit frowned upon, but it was always I tried to get the boys to think about 3/4, 3/4, 3/4 for all the way through. So, by stroke sort of 5, 6, you're almost at full slide, but I might be slightly shorter on the second and third. But like we spoke about earlier, the 8 is a juggernaut. It's a big train. You've got to get that steam engine going, and you can't just get it out and really brash and fast and attack it. It's got to be attacked, but it's got to be attacked in a really efficient clinical manner. And that's one thing that we definitely brought on that day. And I remember it like yesterday, and it's every year it's getting further and further away, but it was a definite big step for our crew. I'm still very proud of that day in particular in 2016. Yeah.
Well, it takes an enormous amount of control.
Yeah.
Just to say, no, we're not going to just, push this rating as high as we can. We're going to hold it a little bit. We're going to work it. We're going to hold it. We're going to work it. And, it takes an incredible amount of discipline to stay in that stroke. And as cliche as it sounds, you're every race is, 250 or 300. It's 300 one-stroke races or 200 one-stroke races, or you're racing the head of the Charles. It's 600 one-stroke races, and you have to maximize, and you have to train to do that, and make sure that the crew's staying with you and you're all going together. And
yeah, big time. Like I said, it was just back to raw basics, and again, the reiteration of it over and over again, the amount of times I've coached it, the amount of times I've sort of been under Tony O'Connor, who recently coached the New Zealand 8, sort of was shadowing him for a little bit the second year over at Christ College in New Zealand. And it's all similar stuff. But it's stuff that we overthink within the sport. And I think sometimes scaling it back definitely results in a better result. And that was a prime example of that. And there's many ways to skin a cat.
Absolutely, yes.
There's many variables, and this is why you guys are talking about this. It's a really interesting concept of what suits you. So I'm not saying it's the be all and end all, because it does sound very raw and basic, just rowing at sort of 3/4 slide to full. But that's what worked for our boat.
Well, and as you said, you had to see what works for your boat. And for example, with masters, who some of them may have very good mobility, some of them may have great flexibility, some of them may not. And you've got these different people sitting in different seats of the 8, but they have to find the common ground, right? So whether it's a junior's boat or a scholastic boat or a master's boat, you still have to find that common ground, that everybody's on the same page and able to go together. So
Absolutely.
taking and not being afraid to be patient. I think that's often something we see, whether no matter the age of the athlete, that they think, oh, I've got to get going. They're already on the.
Well, actually, yeah, I think that was the hardest thing, to lead that dramatic change. That 5 pips, especially as we've been training higher and producing times at a higher rate, to then be on a world stage and go, right, no, we're doing this at 34 is, it takes a lot of discipline to do it, especially being redheaded. I'm obviously known as being quite a hothead and I want to go. So it was, it took a lot of sort of talking through with Langers and feeling as the cock's feeling it. But the guys really bought into that, and it was pretty epic to feel that range of motion.
Well, I think what we're going to do right now, Will, is we're going to wrap up, and we're going to click out of StreamYard, and then we'll meet over on the Zoom link. And for those of you who will be in the VIP session, we'll meet with Will, and we'll be able to dig into this a little bit more, and people will be able to ask their individual questions. So I think Rebecca is showing right now. Are you there? There you are, Rebecca.
Hiding. Yeah, these are all the lessons that are already in the VIP, and we're going to add in that Spratlin start lesson that we talked about earlier. We've got a couple of other elite coaches who have shared their racing starts. And Will, are you ready? Are you going to share yours?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go. Excellent. So if you want to learn Will's starts and ask him a bit more about the difference between his racing in small boats and in big boats, we'll be delighted to see you. We will take a 5-minute break between now and when we actually kick off over in the VIP. And when you log in, the very first lesson, as you saw there, says Zoom link for the VIP. Very easy. If you can't join us immediately, don't worry, because it's all recorded. So get your VIP. And if after watching one of the VIPs, you don't feel you've got full value, we will happily refund you any of the money that you've spent, so that you have no risk. And we really, really hope that you'll get in there and get a bit more detail that will really help your racing starts. Give us 5 minutes.
Brilliant.
And we will see everyone else tomorrow with
on the other side. Right? Awesome.